Chapter 1 of Book 4 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adam Ringeth. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel, Florence, Hapgood. Book 4. The Friends of the ABC. Chapter 1. A Group Which Barely Missed Becoming Historic. At that epoch, which was, to all appearances indifferent, a certain revolutionary quiver was vaguely current. Breaths which had started forth from the depths of '89 and '93 were in the air. Youth was on the point, may the reader pardon us the word, of molting. People were undergoing a transformation, almost without being conscious of it, through the movement of the age. The needle which moves round the compass also moves in souls. Each person was taking that step in advance which he was bound to take. The Royalists were becoming Liberals. Liberals were turning Democrats. It was a flood tide, complicated with 1,000 ebb movements. The peculiarity of ebbs is to create intermixtures. Hence the combination of very singular ideas. People adored both Napoleon and liberty. We are making history here. These were the mirages of that period. Opinions traverse phases. Voltairean royalism, a quaint variety, had a no less singular sequel, Bonapartist liberalism. Other groups of minds were more serious. In that direction, they sounded principles. They attached themselves to the right. They grew enthusiastic for the absolute. They caught glimpses of infinite realizations. The absolute, by its very rigidity, urges spirits towards the sky and causes them to float in illimitable space. There's nothing like dogma for bringing forth dreams, and there is nothing like dreams for engendering the future. Utopia today, flesh and blood tomorrow. These advanced opinions had a double foundation. A beginning of mystery menaced the established order of things, which was suspicious and underhand. A sign which was revolutionary to the highest degree. The second thoughts of power meet the second thoughts of the populace in the mine. The incubation of insurrections gives the retort to the premeditation of coups d'état. There did not, as yet, exist in France any of those vast underlying organizations, like the German Tugendbund and Italian Carbonarism. But here and there were dark underminings, which were in process of throwing off shoots. The coup gourde was being outlined at A. There existed at Paris, among other affiliations of that nature, the Society of the Friends of the ABC. What were these Friends of the ABC? A society which had for its object apparently the education of children, in reality the elevation of man. They declared themselves the Friends of the ABC, the abaissés, the debased, that is to say, the people. They wished to elevate the people. It was a pun which we would do wrong to smile at. Puns are sometimes serious factors in politics. Witness the castratus ad castra, which made a general of the army of Narcissus. Witness barbari et barbarini. Witness tu es Petrus et super hanc Petrum, etc., etc. The Friends of the ABC were not numerous. It was a secret society in the state of embryo. We might almost say a coterie, if coteries ended in heroes. They assembled in Paris in two localities, near the fish market, in a wine shop called Corinthe, of which more will be heard later on, and near the Pantheon in a little café in the Rue Saint-Michel called the Café Musain, now torn down. The first of these meeting places was close to the working man, the second to the students. The assemblies of the Friends of the ABC were usually held in a back room of the Café Musain. This hall, which was tolerably remote from the café, with which it was connected by an extremely long corridor, had 2 windows and an exit with a private stairway on the little Rue des Grès. There they smoked and drank and gambled and laughed. There they conversed in very loud tones about everything, and in whispers of other things. An old map of France under the Republic was nailed to the wall, a sign quite sufficient to excite the suspicion of a police agent. The greater part of the friends of the ABC were students, who were on cordial terms with the working classes. Here are the names of the principal ones. They belong, in a certain measure, to history. Enjolras, Combeferre, Jean Prouvaire, Feuilly, Courfeyrac, Bahorel, L'Aigle or L'Aigle, Joly, Grantaire. These young men formed a sort of family through the bond of friendship. All, with the exception of L'Aigle, were from the south. This was a remarkable group. It vanished in the invisible depths which lie behind us. At the point of this drama we have now reached, it will not perhaps be superfluous to throw a ray of light upon these youthful heads, before the reader beholds them plunging into the shadow of a tragic adventure. Enjolras, whose name we have mentioned first of all, the reader shall see why later on, was an only son, and wealthy. Enjolras was a charming young man, who was capable of being terrible. He was angelically handsome. He was a savage Antinous. One would have said, to see the pensive thoughtfulness of his glance, that he had already, in some previous state of existence, traversed the revolutionary apocalypse. He possessed the tradition of it as though he had been a witness. He was acquainted with all the minute details of the great affair. A pontifical and warlike nature, a singular thing in a youth. He was an officiating priest and a man of war, from the immediate point of view, a soldier of the democracy, above the contemporary movement, the priest of the ideal. His eyes were deep, his lids a little red, his lower lip was thick and easily became disdainful. His brow was lofty. A great deal of brow in a face is like a great deal of horizon in a view. Like certain young men at the beginning of this century and at the end of the last, who became illustrious at an early age, he was endowed with excessive youth, and was as rosy as a young girl, although subject to hours of pallor. Already a man, he still seemed a child. His 22 years appeared to be but 17. He was serious. It did not seem as though he were aware there was on earth a thing called woman. He had but one passion, the right, but one thought, to overthrow the obstacle. On Mount Aventine he would have been Gracchus. In the Convention he would have been Saint-Just. He hardly saw the roses. He ignored spring. He did not hear the caroling of the birds. The bare throat of Evadne would have moved him no more than it would have moved Aristogeiton. He, like Harmodius, thought flowers good for nothing, except to conceal the sword. He was severe in his enjoyments. He chastely dropped his eyes before everything which was not the Republic. He was the marble lover of liberty. His speech was harshly inspired, and had the thrill of a hymn. He was subject to unexpected outbursts of soul. Woe to the love affair which should have risked itself beside him. If Eddie Grisette of the Place Cambrai or the Rue Saint-Jean-de-Beauvais, seeing that face of a youth escaped from college, that page's mien, those long golden lashes, those blue eyes, that hair billowing in the wind, those rosy cheeks, those fresh lips, those exquisite teeth, had conceived an appetite for that complete Aurora, and had tried her beauty on Enjolras, an astounding and terrible glance would have promptly shown her the abyss, and would have taught her not to confound the mighty cherub of Ezekiel with the gallant cherubino of Beaumarchais. By the side of Enjolras, who represented the logic of the Revolution, Combeferre represented its philosophy. Between the logic of the Revolution and its philosophy there exists this difference, that its logic may end in war, whereas its philosophy can end only in peace. Combeferre complimented and rectified Enjolras. He was less lofty, but broader. He desired to pour into all minds the extensive principles of general ideas. He said, "Revolution, but civilization." And around the mountain peak he opened out a vast view of the blue sky. The revolution was more adapted for breathing with Combeferre than with Enjolras. Enjolras expressed its divine right, and Combeferre its natural right. The first attached himself to Robespierre, the second confined himself to Condorcet. Combeferre lived the life of all the rest of the world more than did Enjolras. If it had been granted to these two young men to attain to history, the one would have been the just, the other the wise man. Enjolras was the more virile, Combeferre the more humane. Homo and vir, that was the exact effect of their different shades. Combeferre was as gentle as Enjolras was severe, through natural whiteness. He loved the word citizen, but he preferred the word man. He would gladly have said hombre like the Spanish. He read everything, went to the theaters, attended the courses of public lectures, learned the polarization of light from Arago, grew enthusiastic over a lesson in which Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire explained the double function of the external carotid artery and the internal, the one which makes the face and the one which makes the brain. He kept up with what was going on, followed science step by step, compared Saint-Simon with Fourier, deciphered hieroglyphics, broke the pebble which he found and reasoned on geology, drew from memory a silkworm moth, pointed out the faulty French in the dictionary of the Academy, studied Puységur and Deleuze, affirmed nothing, not even miracles, denied nothing, not even ghosts, turned over the files of the Moniteur, reflected. He declared that the future lies in the hand of the schoolmaster, and busied himself with educational questions. He desired that society should labor without relaxation at the elevation of the moral and intellectual level, at coining science, at putting ideas into circulation, at increasing the mind in youthful persons. And he feared lest the present poverty of method, the paltriness from a literary point of view confined to 2 or 3 centuries called classic, the tyrannical dogmatism of official pedants, scholastic prejudices, and routines, should end by converting our colleges into artificial oyster beds. He was learned, a purist, exact, a graduate of the Polytechnic, a close student, and at the same time thoughtful, even to chimeras, so his friends said. He believed in all dreams, railroads, the suppression of suffering in surgical operations, the fixing of images in the dark chamber, the electric telegraph, the steering of balloons. Moreover, he was not much alarmed by the citadels erected against the human mind in every direction, by superstition, despotism, and prejudice. He was one of those who think that science will eventually turn the position. Enjolras was a chief. Combeferre was a guide. One would have liked to fight under the one, and to march behind the other. It is not that Combeferre was not capable of fighting. He did not refuse a hand-to-hand combat with the obstacle, and to attack it by main force and explosively. But it suited him better to bring the human race into accord with its destiny gradually, by means of education, the inculcation of axioms, the promulgation of positive laws. And, between two lights, his preference was rather for illumination than for conflagration. A conflagration can create an aurora, no doubt, but why not await the dawn? A volcano illuminates, but daybreak furnishes a still better illumination. Possibly Combeferre preferred the whiteness of the beautiful to the blaze of the sublime. A light troubled by smoke, progress purchased at the expense of violence, only half satisfied this tender and serious spirit. The headlong precipitation of a people into the truth, a 93, terrified him. Nevertheless, stagnation was still more repulsive to him. In it he detected putrefaction and death. On the whole, he preferred scum to miasma, and he preferred the torrent to the cesspool, and the falls of Niagara to the lake of Montfaucon. In short, he desired neither halt nor haste. While his tumultuous friends, captivated by the absolute, adored and invoked splendid revolutionary adventures, Combeferre was inclined to let progress, good progress, take its own course. He may have been cold, but he was pure, methodical, but irreproachable, phlegmatic, but imperturbable. Combeferre would have knelt and clasped his hands to enable the future to arrive in all its candor, and that nothing might disturb the immense and virtuous evolution of the races. The good must be innocent, he repeated incessantly. And in fact, if the grandeur of the revolution consists in keeping the dazzling ideal fixedly in view, and of soaring thither athwart the lightnings, with fire and blood in its talons, the beauty of progress lies in being spotless. And there exists between Washington, who represents the one, and Danton, who incarnates the other, that difference which separates the swan from the angel with the wings of an eagle. Jean Prouvaire was a still softer shade than Combeferre. His name was Jehan, owing to that petty momentary freak which mingled with the powerful and profound movement which sprang the very essential study of the Middle Ages. Jean Prouvaire was in love. He cultivated a pot of flowers, played on the flute, made verses, loved the people, pitied woman, wept over the child, confounded God and the future in the same confidence, and blamed the Revolution for having caused the fall of a royal head, that of André Chénier. His voice was ordinarily delicate, but suddenly grew manly. He was learned even to erudition, and almost an Orientalist. Above all, he was good, and a very simple thing to those who know how nearly goodness borders on grandeur. In the matter of poetry, he preferred the immense. He knew Italian, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and these served him only for the perusal of four poets, Dante, Juvenal, Aeschylus, and Isaiah. In French, he preferred Corneille to Racine, and Agrippa d'Aubigné to Corneille. He loved to saunter through fields of wild oats and cornflowers, and busied himself with clouds nearly as much as with events. His mind had two attitudes, one on the side towards man, the other on that towards God. He studied, or he contemplated. All day long he buried himself in social questions: salary, capital, credit, marriage, religion, liberty of thought, education, penal servitude, poverty, association, property, production and sharing, the enigma of this lower world which covers the human ant-hill with darkness. And at night he gazed upon the planets, those enormous beings. Like Enjolras, he was wealthy and an only son. He spoke softly, bowed his head, lowered his eyes, smiled with embarrassment, dressed badly, had an awkward air, blushed at a mere nothing, and was very timid. Yet he was intrepid. Feuilly was a working man, a fan-maker, orphaned both of father and mother, who earned with difficulty 3 francs a day, and had but one thought: to deliver the world. He had one other preoccupation: to educate himself. He called this also delivering himself. He had taught himself to read and write. Everything that he knew he had learned by himself. Feuilly had a generous heart. The range of his embrace was immense. This orphan had adopted the peoples. As his mother had failed him, he meditated on his country. he brooded with the profound divination of the man of the people over what we now call the idea of the nationality, had learned history with the express object of raging with full knowledge of the case. In this club of young utopians, occupied chiefly with France, he represented the outside world. He had for his specialty Greece, Poland, Hungary, Roumania, Italy. He uttered these names incessantly, appropriately and inappropriately, with the tenacity of right. The violations of Turkey on Greece and Thessaly, of Russia on Warsaw, of Austria on Venice, enraged him. Above all things, the great violence of 1772 aroused him. There is no more sovereign eloquence than the true in indignation. He was eloquent with that eloquence. He was inexhaustible on that infamous date of 1772, on the subject of that noble and valiant race suppressed by treason, and that three-sided crime, on that monstrous ambush, the prototype and pattern of all those horrible suppressions of states which, since that time, have struck many a noble nation, and have annulled their certificate of birth, so to speak. All contemporary social crimes have their origin in the partition of Poland. The partition of Poland is a theorem of which all present political outrages are the corollaries. There has not been a despot nor a traitor for nearly a century back who has not signed, approved, countersigned, and copied, ne veriatur, the partition of Poland. When the record of modern treasons was examined, that was the first thing which made its appearance. The Congress of Vienna consulted that crime before consummating its own. 1772 sounded the onset. 1815 was the death of the game. Such was Feuilly's habitual text. This poor working man had constituted himself the tutor of justice, and she recompensed him by rendering him great. The fact is that there is eternity in right. Warsaw can no more be Tartar than Venice can be Teuton. Kings lose their pains and their honor in the attempt to make them so. Sooner or later, the submerged part floats to the surface and reappears. Greece becomes Greece again. Italy is once more Italy. The protest of right against the deed persists forever. The theft of a nation cannot be allowed by prescription. These lofty deeds of rascality have no future. A nation cannot have its mark extracted like a pocket handkerchief. Courfeyrac had a father who was called Monsieur de Courfeyrac. One of the false ideas of the bourgeoisie under the Restoration, as regards aristocracy and the nobility, was to believe in the particle. The particle, as everyone knows, possesses no significance. But the bourgeois of the epoch of La Minerve estimated so highly that poor de that they thought themselves bound to abdicate it. Monsieur de Chauvelin had called himself Monsieur Chauvelin. Monsieur de Comortin, Monsieur Comortin. Monsieur de Constant de Robec, Benjamin Constant. Monsieur de Lafayette, Monsieur Lafayette. Courfeyrac had not wished to remain behind the rest, and called himself plain Courfeyrac. We might almost, so far as Courfeyrac is concerned, stop here, and confine ourselves to saying with regard to what remains, for Courfeyrac, see Tholomyès. Courfeyrac had, in fact, that animation of youth, which may be called the beauté du diable of the mind. Later on, this disappears like the playfulness of the kitten, and all this grace ends with the bourgeois on 2 legs and with the tomcat on 4 paws. This sort of wit is transmitted from generation to generation of the successive levies of youth who traverse the schools, who pass it from hand to hand, quasi cursores, and is almost always exactly the same. So that, as we have just pointed out, Anyone who had listened to Courfeyrac in 1828 would have thought he heard Tholomyès in 1817. Only, Courfeyrac was an honorable fellow. Beneath the apparent similarities of the exterior mind, the difference between him and Tholomyès was very great. The latent man which existed in the two was totally different in the first from what it was in the second. There was in Tholomyès a district attorney, and in Courfeyrac a paladin. Enjolras was the chief, Combeferre was the guide, Courfeyrac was the centre. The others gave more light, he shed more warmth. The truth is that he possessed all the qualities of a centre, roundness and radiance. Bahorel had figured in the bloody tumult of June 1822 on the occasion of the burial of young Lallemand. Bahorel was a good-natured mortal who kept bad company. Brave, a spendthrift, prodigal, and, to the verge of generosity, talkative and at times eloquent, bold to the verge of effrontery, the best fellow possible. He had daring waistcoats and scarlet opinions. A wholesale blusterer, that is to say, loving nothing so much as a quarrel, unless it were an uprising, and nothing so much as an uprising, unless it were a revolution. Always ready to smash a window pane, then to tear up the pavement, then to demolish a government, just to see the effect of it. A student in his 11th year. He had nosed about the law, but did not practice it. He had taken for his device, never a lawyer, and for his armorial bearings, a nightstand in which was visible a square cap. Every time that he passed the law school, which rarely happened, he buttoned up his frock coat, the paletot had not yet been invented, and took hygienic precautions. Of the school porter he said, "What a fine old man!" and of the dean, Monsieur Delvincourt, "What a monument!" In his lectures he espied subjects for ballads, and in his professors occasions for caricature. He wasted a tolerably large allowance, something like 3,000 francs a year, in doing nothing. He had peasant parents, whom he had contrived to imbue with respect for their son. He said of them, "They are peasants and not bourgeois. That is the reason they are intelligent." Bahorel, a man of caprice, was scattered over numerous cafés. The others had habits, he had none. He sauntered. To stray is human. To saunter is Parisian. In reality he had a penetrating mind, and was more of a thinker than appeared to view. He served as a connecting link between the Friends of the ABC and other still unorganized groups, which were destined to take form later on. In this conclave of young heads there was one bald member. The Marquis d'Avaray, whom Louis XVIII made a duke for having assisted him to enter a hackney coach on the day when he emigrated, was wont to relate, that in 1814, on his return to France, as the king was disembarking at Calais, a man handed him a petition. "What is your request?" said the king. "Sire, a post office." "What is your name?" "L'Aigle." The king frowned, glanced at the signature of the petition, and beheld the name written thus, Lesgle. This non-Bonaparte orthography touched the king, and he began to smile. "Sire," resumed the man with the petition, "I had for ancestor a keeper of the hounds, surnamed L'Aiguille. This surname furnished my name. I am called L'Aiguille, by contraction L'Aigle, and by corruption L'Aigle." This caused the king to smile broadly. Later on he gave the man the posting office of Meaux, either intentionally or accidentally. The bald member of the group was the son of this L'Aigle or L'Aigle, and he signed himself L'Aigle de Meaux. As an abbreviation, his companions called him Bossuet. Bossuet was a gay but unlucky fellow. His specialty was not to succeed in anything. As an offset he laughed at everything. At 25 he was bald. His father had ended by owning a house and a field, but he, the son, had made haste to lose that house and field in a bad speculation. He had nothing left. He possessed knowledge and wit, but all he did miscarried. Everything failed him, and everybody deceived him. What he was building tumbled down on top of him. If he were splitting wood, he cut off a finger. If he had a mistress, he speedily discovered that he had a friend also. Some misfortune happened to him every moment. Hence his joviality. He said, "I live under falling tiles." He was not easily astonished, because, for him, an accident was what he had foreseen. He took his bad luck serenely, and smiled at the teasing of fate, like a person who is listening to pleasantries. He was poor, but his fund of good humor was inexhaustible. He soon reached his last sou, never his last burst of laughter. When adversity entered his doors, he saluted this old acquaintance cordially. He tapped all catastrophes on the stomach. He was familiar with fatality to the point of calling it by its nickname. "Good day, Guignon," he said to it. These persecutions of fate had rendered him inventive. He was full of resources. He had no money, but he found means, when it seemed good to him, to indulge in unbridled extravagance. One night he went so far as to eat 100 francs in a supper with a wench, which inspired him to make this memorable remark in the midst of the orgy: "Pull off my boots, you 5-louis jade." Bossuet was slowly directing his steps towards the profession of a lawyer. He was pursuing his law studies after the manner of Bahorel. Bossuet had not much domicile, sometimes none at all. He lived now with one, now with another, most often with Joly. Joly was studying medicine. He was 2 years younger than Bossuet. Joly was the malade imaginaire junior. What he had won in medicine was to be more of an invalid than a doctor. At 23 he thought himself a valetudinarian, and passed his life in inspecting his tongue in the mirror. He affirmed that man becomes magnetic, like a needle, and in his chamber he placed his bed with its head to the south and the foot to the north, so that, at night, the circulation of his blood might not be interfered with by the great electric current of the globe. During thunderstorms he felt his pulse. Otherwise, he was the gayest of them all. All these young, maniacal, puny, merry incoherences lived in harmony together, and the result was an eccentric and agreeable being, whom his comrades, who were prodigal of winged consonants, called Joly. "You may fly away on the 4 L's," Jean Prouvaire said to him. Joly had a trick of touching his nose with the tip of his cane, which is an indication of a sagacious mind. All these young men, who differed so greatly, and who, on the whole, can only be discussed seriously, held the same religion: progress. All were the direct sons of the French Revolution. The most giddy of them became solemn when they pronounced that date, '89. Their fathers in the flesh had been either royalists, doctrinaires, it matters not what. This confusion anterior to themselves, who were young, did not concern them at all. The pure blood of principle ran in their veins. They attached themselves, without intermediate shades, to incorruptible right and absolute duty. Affiliated and initiated, they sketched out the ideal underground. Among all these glowing hearts and thoroughly convinced minds, there was one skeptic. How came he there? By juxtaposition. This skeptic's name was Grantaire, and he was in the habit of signing himself with this rebus, R. Grantaire was a man who took good care not to believe in anything. Moreover, he was one of the students who had learned the most during their courses at Paris. He knew that the best coffee was to be had at the Café Lemblin, and the best billiards at the Café Voltaire, that good cakes and lasses were to be found at the Hermitage on the Boulevard du Maine, spatchcocked chickens at Mother Sauget's, excellent matelotes in the Barrière de la Cunette, and a certain thin white wine at the Barrière du Combe Pat. He knew the best place for everything. In addition, boxing and foot fencing, and some dances. And he was a thorough single-stick player. He was a tremendous drinker to boot. He was inordinately homely. The prettiest boot-stitcher of that day, Irma Boissy, enraged with his homeliness, pronounced sentence on him as follows: Grantaire is impossible. But Grantaire's fatuity was not to be disconcerted. He stared tenderly and fixedly at all women, with the air of saying to them all, "If I only chose," and of trying to make his comrades believe that he was in general demand. All those words, rights of the people, rights of man, the social contract, the French Revolution, the Republic, democracy, humanity, civilization, religion, progress, came very near to signifying nothing whatever to Grantaire. He smiled at them. Skepticism, that carries of the intelligence, had not left him a single whole idea. He lived with irony. This was his axiom: there is but one certainty, my full glass. He sneered at all devotion in all parties, the father as well as the brother, Robespierre Junior as well as Loizerolles. They are greatly in advance to be dead, he exclaimed. He said of the crucifix, there is a gibbet which has been a success. A rover, a gambler, a libertine, often drunk, he displeased these young dreamers by humming incessantly, J'aime les filles et j'aime le bon vin. Air, vive Henri IV. However, this skeptic had one fanaticism. This fanaticism was neither a dogma, nor an idea, nor an art, nor a science. It was a man, Enjolras. Grantaire admired, loved, and venerated Enjolras. To whom did this anarchical scoffer unite himself in this phalanx of absolute minds? To the most absolute. In what manner had Enjolras subjugated him? By his ideas? No. By his character. A phenomenon which is often observable. A skeptic who adheres to a believer is as simple as the law of complementary colors. That which we lack attracts us. No one loves the light like the blind man. The dwarf adores the drum major. The toad always has his eyes fixed on heaven. Why? In order to watch the bird in its flight. Grantaire, in whom writhed doubt, loved to watch faith soar in Enjolras. He had need of Enjolras. That chaste, healthy, firm, upright, hard, candid nature charmed him, without his clearly being aware of it, and without the idea of explaining it to himself having occurred to him. He admired his opposite by instinct. His soft, yielding, dislocated, sickly, shapeless ideas attached themselves to Enjolras as to a spinal column. His moral backbone leaned on that firmness. Grantaire, in the presence of Enjolras, became someone once more. He was, himself, moreover, composed of two elements, which were, to all appearances, incompatible. He was ironical and cordial. His indifference loved. His mind could get along without belief, but his heart could not get along without friendship. A profound contradiction, for an affection is a conviction. His nature was thus constituted. There are men who seem to be born to be the reverse, the obverse, the wrong side. They are Pollux, Patrocles, Nisus, Eudamidas, Hephaestion, Peshmerga. They only exist on condition that they are backed up with another man. Their name is a sequel, and is only written preceded by the conjunction and their existence is not their own. It is the other side of an existence which is not theirs. Grantaire was one of these men. He was the obverse of Enjolras. One might almost say that affinities begin with the letters of the alphabet. In the series, O and P are inseparable. You can, at will, pronounce O and P, or Orestes and Pylades. Grantaire, Enjolras' true satellite, inhabited this circle of young men. He lived there. He took no pleasure anywhere but there. He followed them everywhere. His joy was to see these forms go and come through the fumes of wine. They tolerated him on account of his good humor. Enjolras, the believer, disdained this skeptic, and, a sober man himself, scorned this drunkard. He accorded him a little, lofty pity. Grantaire was an unaccepted Pylades, always harshly treated by Enjolras, roughly repulsed, rejected yet ever returning to the charge. He said of Enjolras, "What fine marble!" End of Book 4, Chapter 1. Recording by Adam Ringeth.
Chapter 2 of Book 4 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by May Lowe. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 4, The Friends of the ABC. Chapter 2, Blondot's Funeral Oration by Bossuet. On a certain afternoon, which had, as will be seen hereafter, some coincidence with the events heretofore related, Laigle de Meaux was to be seen leaning in a sensual manner against the door-post of the Café Musain. He had the air of a caryatid on a vacation. He carried nothing but his reverie, however. He was staring at the Place Saint-Michel. To lean one's back against a thing is equivalent to lying down while standing erect, which attitude is not hated by thinkers. Laigle de Meaux was pondering without melancholy over a little misadventure which had befallen him 2 days previously at the law school, and which had modified his personal plans for the future, plans which were rather indistinct at any case. Reverie does not prevent a cab from passing by, nor the dreamer from taking note of that cab. Laigle de Meaux, whose eyes were straying about in a sort of diffuse lounging, perceived, athwart his somnambulism, a two-wheeled vehicle proceeding through the place, at a foot pace and apparently in indecision. For whom was this cabriolet? Why was it driving at a walk? Laigle took a survey. In it, beside the coachman, sat a young man, and in front of the young man lay a rather bulky hand-bag. The bag displayed to passers-by the following name, inscribed in large black letters on a card which was sewn to the stuff: Marius Pontmercy. This name caused Laigle to change his attitude. He drew himself up and hurled this apostrophe at the young man in the cabriolet: "Monsieur Marius Pontmercy!" The cabriolet thus addressed came to a halt. The young man, who also seemed deeply buried in thought, raised his eyes. "Hey?" said he. "You are Monsieur Marius Pontmercy?" "Certainly." "I was looking for you," resumed Laigle de Meaux. "How so?" demanded Marius, for it was he. In fact, he had just quitted his grandfather's, and had before him a face which he now beheld for the first time. "I do not know you." "Neither do I know you," responded Laigle. Marius thought he had encountered a wag, the beginning of a mystification in the open street. He was not in a very good humor at the moment. He frowned. Laigle de Meaux went on imperturbably: "You were not at the school the day before yesterday." "That is possible." "That is certain." "You are a student?" demanded Marius. "Yes, sir, like yourself. Day before yesterday I entered the school, by chance. You know, one does have such freaks sometimes. The professor was just calling the roll. You are not unaware that they are very ridiculous on such occasions. At the third call, unanswered, your name is erased from the list. 60 francs in the gulf. Marius began to listen. It was Blondeau who was making the call. You know Blondeau. He has a very pointed and a very malicious nose, and he delights to scent out the absent. He slyly began with the letter P. I was not listening, not being compromised by that letter. The call was not going badly. No erasures, the universe was present. Blondeau was grieved. I said to myself, Blondeau, my love, you will not get the very smallest sort of an execution today. All at once, Blondeau calls, Marius, Pontmercy. No one answers. Blondeau, filled with hope, repeats more loudly, Marius, Pontmercy. And he takes his pen. Monsieur, I have the bowels of compassion. I said to myself hastily, here's a brave fellow who is going to get scratched out. Attention! Here is a veritable mortal who is not exact. He is not a good student. Here is none of your heavy-sides, a student who studies, a greenhorn pedant, strong on letters, theology, science, and sapience. One of those dull wits cut by the square, a pin by profession. He is an honourable idler who lounges, who practises country jaunts, who cultivates the grisette, who pays court with the fair sex, who is at this very moment perhaps with my mistress. Let us save him. Death to Blondeau. At that moment, Blondeau dipped his pen in, all black with erasures in the ink, cast his yellow eyes around the audience room, and repeated for the third time, Marius Pontmercy. I replied, present. That is why you are not crossed off. Monsieur, said Marius. And why I was, added Laigle des Mots. I do not understand you, said Marius. Laigle resumed. Nothing is more simple. I was close to the desk to reply, and close to the door for the purpose of flight. The professor gazed at me with a certain intensity. All of a sudden, Blondeau, who must be the malicious nose alluded to by Boileau, skipped the letter L. L is my letter. I am from Meaux. My name is Laigle. Laigle, interrupted Marius. What a fine name. Monsieur, Blondeau came to this fine name and called, Laigle. I reply, present. Then Blondeau gazes at me with the gentleness of a tiger, and says to me, if you are Pontmercy, you are not Laigle. A phrase which had a disobliging air for you, but which was lugubrious only for me. That said, he crossed me off. Marius exclaimed, I am mortified, sir. First of all, interposed Laigle, I demand permission to embalm Blondeau in a few phrases of deeply felt eulogium. I will assume that he is dead. There will be no great change required in his gauntness, in his pallor, in his coldness, and in his smell. And I say, erudimini qui jucatis terram. Here lies Blondeau, Blondeau the nose, Blondeau Nasica, the ox of discipline, bos disciplinae, the bloodhound of the password, the angel of the roll call, who was upright, square exact, rigid, honest, and hideous. God crossed him off as he crossed me off. Marius resumed, I am very sorry. Young man, said Laigle des Mots, let this serve you as a lesson. In future, be exact. I really beg you 1,000 pardons. Do not expose your neighbor to the danger of having his name erased again. I am extremely sorry. Laigle burst out laughing. And I am delighted. I was on the brink of becoming a lawyer. This erasure saves me. I renounce the triumphs of the bar. I shall not defend the widow, and I shall not attack the orphan. No more toga, no more stage. Here is my erasure, all ready for me. It is to you that I am indebted for it, Monsieur Pontmercy. I intend to pay a solemn call of thanks upon you. Where do you live? In this cab, said Marius. A sign of opulence, retorted Laigle calmly. I congratulate you. You have there a rent of 9,000 francs per annum. At that moment, Courfeyrac emerged from the café. Marius smiled sadly. I have paid this rent for the last 2 hours, and I aspire to get rid of it. But there is a sort of history attached to it, and I don't know where to go. Come to my place, sir, said Courfeyrac. I have the priority, observed Laigle, but I have no home. Hold your tongue, Bossuet, said Courfeyrac. Bossuet, said Marius. But I thought that your name was L'Aigle. De mots, replied L'Aigle. By metaphor, Bossuet. Courfeyrac entered the cab. Coachman, said he, Hôtel de la Porte Saint-Jacques. And that very evening, Marius found himself installed in a chamber of the Hôtel de la Porte Saint-Jacques, side by side with Courfeyrac. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 3 of Book 4th of Les Misérables, Volume 3 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mistopheles. Les Misérables, Volume 3 by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 4th, The Friends of the ABC. Chapter 3, Marius's Astonishments. In a few days, Marius had become Courfeyrac's friend. Youth is a season for prompt welding and the rapid healing of scars. Marius breathed freely in Courfeyrac's society, a decidedly new thing for him. Courfeyrac put no questions to him. He did not even think of such a thing. At that age, faces disclose everything on the spot. Words are superfluous. These are young men of whom it can be said that their countenances chatter. One look at them, and one knows them. One morning, however, Courfeyrac abruptly addressed this interrogation to him. "By the way, have you any political opinions?" "The idea," said Marius, almost affronted by the question. "What are you?" "A Democrat Bonapartist." "The grey hue of a reassured rat," said Courfeyrac. On the following day, Courfeyrac introduced Marius at the Café Musain. Then he whispered in his ear with a smile, "I must give you your entry to the Revolution." And he led him to the hall of the Friends of the ABC. He presented him to the other comrades, saying this simple word which Marius did not understand, a pupil. Marius had fallen into a wasp's nest of wits. However, although he was silent and grave, he was none the less both winged and armed. Marius, up to that time solitary and inclined to soliloquy and to asides, both by habit and by taste, was a little fluttered by this covey of young men around him. All these various initiatives solicited his attention at once, and pulled him about. The tumultuous movements of these minds at liberty and at work set his ideas in a whirl. Sometimes in his trouble they led so far from him that he had difficulty in recovering them. He heard them talk of philosophy, of literature, of art, of history, of religion in unexpected fashion. He caught glimpses of strange aspects, and, as he did not place them in proper perspective, he was not altogether sure that it was not chaos that he grasped. On abandoning his grandfather's opinions for the opinions of his father, he had supposed himself fixed. With uneasiness, and without daring to avow it to himself, that he was not. The angle at which he saw everything began to be displaced anew. A certain oscillation set all the horizons of his brains in motion, an odd interval upsetting. He almost suffered from it. It seemed as though there were no consecrated things for those young men. Marius heard singular propositions on every sort of subject, which embarrassed his still timid mind. A theatre poster presented itself, adorned with the title of a tragedy from the ancient repertory called classic. "Down with tragedy dear to the bourgeois," cried Parole, and Marius heard Combeferre reply, "You are wrong, Parole. The bourgeoisie loves tragedy, and the bourgeoisie must be left at peace on that score. Bewigged tragedy has a reason for its existence, and I am not one of those who, by the order of Aeschylus, contest its right to existence. There are rough outlines in nature. There are in creation ready-made parodies, a beak which is not a beak, wings which are not wings, gills which are not gills, paws which are not paws, a cry of pain which arouses a desire to laugh. There is the duck. Now, since poultry exists by the side of the bird, I do not see why classic tragedy should not exist in the face of antique tragedy. Or chance decreed that Marius should traverse Rue Jean-Jacques Rousseau between Angelus and Courfeyrac. Courfeyrac took his arm. Pay attention. This is the Rue Plâtrier, now called Rue Jean-Jacques Rousseau, on account of a singular household which lived in it 60 years ago. This consisted of Jean-Jacques and Therese. From time to time, little beings were born here. Therese gave birth to them. Jean-Jacques represented them as foundlings. And Angelus addressed Courfeyrac roughly. "Silence in the presence of Jean-Jacques. I admire that man. He denied his own children, that may be, but he adopted the people." Not one of these young men articulated the word "the Emperor." Jean Prouvaire alone sometimes said Napoleon. All the others said Bonaparte. Angelus pronounced it Buonaparte. Marius was vaguely surprised. Initium sapientiae. End of Book 4th, Chapter 3. Recording by Mistopheles.
Of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bruce Peary. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 4, The Friends of the ABC. Chapter 4, The Back Room of the Café Musain. One of the conversations among the young men at which Marius was present and in which he sometimes joined was a veritable shock to his mind. This took place in the back room of the Café Musain. Nearly all of the friends of the ABC had convened that evening. The argand lamp was solemnly lighted. They talked of one thing and another without passion and with noise. With the exception of Enjolras and Marius, who held their peace, all were haranguing rather at haphazard. Conversations between comrades sometimes are subject to these peaceable tumults. It was a game and an uproar as much as a conversation. They tossed words to each other and caught them up in turn. They were chattering in all quarters. No woman was admitted to this back room except Louison, the dishwasher of the café, who passed through it from time to time to go to her washing in the lavatory. Grantaire, thoroughly drunk, was deafening the corner of which he had taken possession, reasoning and contradicting at the top of his lungs, and shouting, "I am thirsty! Mortals! I am dreaming that the tun of Heidelberg has an attack of apoplexy, and that I am one of the dozen leeches which will be applied to it. I want a drink. I desire to forget life. Life is a hideous invention of I know not whom. It lasts no time at all and is worth nothing. One breaks one's neck in living. Life is a theatre set in which there are but few practicable entrances. Happiness is an antique reliquary, painted on one side only. Ecclesiastes says all is vanity. I agree with that good man, who never existed, perhaps. Zero, not wishing to go stark naked, clothed himself in vanity. Oh, vanity! The patching up of everything with big words. A kitchen is a laboratory. A dancer is a professor. An acrobat is a gymnast. A boxer is a pugilist. An apothecary is a chemist. A wig-maker is an artist. A hodman is an architect. A jockey is a sportsman. A woodlouse is a terigibranche. Vanity has a right and a wrong side. The right side is stupid. It is the Negro with his glass beads. The wrong side is foolish. It is the philosopher with his rags. I weep over the one, and I laugh over the other. What are called honours and dignities, and even dignity and honour, are generally of pinchbeck. Kings make playthings of human pride. Caligula made a horse a consul. Charles II made a knight of a sirloin. Wrap yourself up now, then, between consul incitatus and baronet roast beef. As for the intrinsic value of people, it is no longer respectable in the least. Listen to the panegyric which neighbour makes of neighbour. White on white is ferocious. If the lily could speak, what a setting down it would give the dove. A bigoted woman prating of a devout woman is more venomous than the asp and the cobra. It is a shame that I am ignorant. Otherwise I would quote to you a mass of things, but I know nothing. For instance, I have always been witty. When I was a pupil of Gros, instead of daubing wretched little pictures, I passed my time in pilfering apples. Rapin is the masculine of rapine. So much for myself. As for the rest of you, you are worth no more than I am. I scoff at your perfections, excellencies, and qualities. Every good quality tends towards a defect. Economy borders on avarice. The generous man is next door to the prodigal. The brave man rubs elbows with the braggart. He who says very pious says a trifle bigoted. There are just as many vices in virtue as there are holes in Diogenes' cloak. Whom do you admire, the slain or the slayer, Caesar or Brutus? Generally, men are in favour of the slayer. Long live Brutus, he has slain. There lies the virtue. Virtue granted, but madness also. There are queer spots on those great men. The Brutus who killed Caesar was in love with the statue of a little boy. This statue was from the hand of the Greek sculptor Strongyllion, who also carved that figure of an Amazon known as the Beautiful Leg, Eucnemos, which Nero carried with him in his travels. This Strongyllion left but 2 statues which placed Nero and Brutus in accord. Brutus was in love with the one, Nero with the other. All history is nothing but wearisome repetition. One century is the plagiarist of the other. The battle of Marengo copies the battle of Pydna. The Tolbiac of Clovis and the Austerlitz of Napoleon are as like each other as 2 drops of water. I don't attach much importance to victory. Nothing is so stupid as to conquer. True glory lies in convincing. But try to prove something. If you are content with success, what mediocrity! And with conquering, what wretchedness! Alas, vanity and cowardice everywhere. Everything obeys success, even grammar. Si volet usus, says Horace. Therefore, I disdain the human race. Shall we descend to the party at all? Do you wish me to begin admiring the peoples? What people, if you please? Shall it be Greece? The Athenians, those Parisians of days gone by, slew Phocion, as we might say Coligny, and fawned upon tyrants to such an extent that Anacephorus said of Pisistratus, his urine attracts the bees. The most prominent man in Greece for 50 years was that grammarian Philetus, who was so small and so thin that he was obliged to load his shoes with lead in order not to be blown away by the wind. There stood on the great square in Corinth a statue carved by Silanion and catalogued by Pliny. This statue represented Episthetes. What did Episthetes do? He invented a trip. That sums up Greece and glory. Let us pass on to others. Shall I admire England? Shall I admire France? France? Why? Because of Paris? I've just told you my opinion of Athens. England? Why? Because of London? I hate Carthage. And then, London, the metropolis of luxury, is the headquarters of wretchedness. There are 100 deaths a year of hunger in the parish of Charing Cross alone. Such is Albion. I add, as the climax, that I have seen an Englishwoman dancing in a wreath of roses and blue spectacles. A fig, then, for England. If I do not admire John Bull, shall I admire brother Jonathan? I have but little taste for that slave-holding brother. Take away time is money, what remains of England? Take away cotton is king, and what remains of America? Germany is the lymph. Italy is the bile. Shall we go into ecstasies over Russia? Voltaire admired it. He also admired China. I admit that Russia has its beauties, among others a stout despotism, but I pity the despots. Their health is delicate. A decapitated Alexis, a poignarded Peter, a strangled Paul, another Paul crushed flat with kicks, divers Ivans strangled with their throats cut, numerous Nicholases and Basils poisoned, all this indicates that the palace of the emperors of Russia is in a condition of flagrant insalubrity. All civilized peoples offer this detail to the admiration of the thinker: war. Now, war, civilized war, exhausts and sums up all the forms of ruffianism, from the brigandage of the Trabuceros in the gorges of Mount Jaxa to the marauding of the Comanche Indians in the Doubtful Pass. Bah, you will say to me, but Europe is certainly better than Asia. I admit that Asia is a farce, but I do not precisely see what you find to laugh at in the Grand Lama, you peoples of the West who have mingled with your fashions and your elegances all the complicated filth of majesty, from the dirty chemise of Queen Isabella to the chamber chair of the Dauphin. Gentlemen of the human race, I tell you, not a bit of it. It is at Brussels that the most beer is consumed, at Stockholm the most brandy, at Madrid the most chocolate, at Amsterdam the most gin, at London the most wine, at Constantinople the most coffee, at Paris the most absinthe. These are all the useful notions. Paris carries the day in short. In Paris even the rag-pickers are sybarites. Diogenes would have loved to be a rag-picker of the Place Maubert better than to be a philosopher at the Piraeus. Learn this in addition: the wine shops of the rag-pickers are called bibines. The most celebrated are the Saucepan and the Slaughter-house. Hence, tea-gardens, goguettes, cabelots, boui-boui, mastroquets, basringues, manazangs, bibines of the rag-pickers, caravanseries of the caliphs. I certify to you, I am a voluptuary. I eat at Richard's at 40 sous a head. I must have Persian carpets to roll naked Cleopatra in. Where is Cleopatra? Ah, so it is you, Louison. Good day. Thus did Grantaire, more than intoxicated, launch into speech, catching at the dishwasher in her passage from his corner in the back room of the Café Musain. Bossuet, extending his hand towards him, tried to impose silence on him, and Grantaire began again, worse than ever. Aigle de Meaux, down with your paws! You produce on me no effect with your gesture of Hippocrates refusing Artaxerxes' bric-a-brac. I excuse you from the task of soothing me. Moreover, I am sad. What do you wish me to say to you? Man is evil, man is deformed. The butterfly is a success. Man is a failure. God made a mistake with that animal. A crowd offers a choice of ugliness. The first comer is a wretch. Femme, woman, rhymes with infâme, infamous. Yes, I have the spleen complicated with melancholy, with homesickness, plus hypochondria, and I am vexed, and I rage, and I yawn, and I am bored, and I am tired to death, and I am stupid. Let God go to the devil. Silence, then, capital R, resumed Bossuet, who was discussing a point of law behind the scenes, and who was plunged more than waist-high in a phrase of judicial slang, of which this is the conclusion. And as for me, although I am hardly a legist, and at the most an amateur attorney, I maintain this, that in accordance with the terms of the customs of Normandy, at Saint-Michel, and for each year, an equivalent must be paid to the profit of the lord of the manor, saving the rights of others, and by all and several, the proprietors as well as those seized with inheritance, and that, for all emphyteuses, leases, freeholds, contracts of domain, mortgages— Echo, plaintive nymph, hummed Grantaire. Near Grantaire, an almost silent table, a sheet of paper, an inkstand, and a pen between 2 glasses of brandy, announced that a vaudeville was being sketched out. This great affair was being discussed in a low voice, and the 2 heads at work touched each other. Let us begin by finding names. When one has the names, one finds the subject. That is true. Dictate, I will write. Monsieur Dorimont. An independent gentleman? Of course. His daughter, Celestine. What next? Colonel Saint-Val. Saint-Val is stale. I should say Valsin. Beside the vaudeville aspirants, another group, which was also taking advantage of the uproar to talk low, was discussing a duel. An old fellow of 30 was counselling a young one of 18, and explaining to him what sort of an adversary he had to deal with. The deuce! Look out for yourself. He is a fine swordsman. His play is neat. He has the attack, no wasted feints, wrist, dash, lightning, a just parade, mathematical parries, bigre, and he is left-handed. In the angle opposite Grantaire, Joly and Bahorel were playing dominoes and talking of love. You are in luck, that you are, Joly was saying. You have a mistress who is always laughing. That is a fault of hers, returned Bahorel. One's mistress does wrong to laugh. That encourages one to deceive her. To see her gay removes your remorse. If you see her sad, your conscience pricks you. Ingrate! A woman who laughs is such a good thing, and you never quarrel. That is because of the treaty which we have made. On forming our little holy alliance, we assigned ourselves each our frontier, which we never cross. What is situated on the side of winter belongs to Vaud, on the side of the wind to Gex. Hence the peace. Peace is happiness digesting. And you, Joly, where do you stand in your entanglement with Mamselle? You know whom I mean. She sulks at me with cruel patience. Yet you are a lover to soften the heart with gauntness. Alas! In your place I would let her alone. That is easy enough to say. And to do. Is not her name Musichetta? Yes, my poor Bahorel, she is a superb girl, very literary, with tiny feet, little hands. She dresses well, and is white and dimpled, with the eyes of a fortune-teller. I am wild over her. My dear fellow, then in order to please her, you must be elegant, and produce effects with your knees. Buy a good pair of trousers of double-milled cloth at Staub's. That will assist. At what price? Shouted Grantaire. The third corner was delivered up to a poetical discussion. Pagan mythology was giving battle to Christian mythology. The question was about Olympus, whose part was taken by Jean Prouvaire out of pure romanticism. Jean Prouvaire was timid only in repose. Once excited, he burst forth, a sort of mirth accentuated his enthusiasm, and he was at once both laughing and lyric. Let us not insult the gods, said he. The gods may not have taken their departure. Jupiter does not impress me as dead. The gods are dreams, you say? Well, even in nature, such as it is today, after the flight of these dreams, we still find all the grand old pagan myths. Such and such a mountain with the profile of a citadel, like the Vinmal, for example, is still to me the headdress of Cybele. It has not been proved to me that Pan does not come at night to breathe into the hollow trunks of the willows, stopping up the holes in turn with his fingers, and I have always believed that Io had something to do with the cascade of Pisvache. In the last corner they were talking politics. The charter which had been granted was getting roughly handled. Combeferre was upholding it weakly. Courfeyrac was energetically making a breach in it. On the table lay an unfortunate copy of the famous Touquet Charter. Courfeyrac had seized it and was brandishing it, mingling with his arguments the rattling of this sheet of paper. In the first place, I won't have any kings. If it were only from an economical point of view, I don't want any. A king is a parasite. One does not have kings gratis. Listen to this, the dearness of kings. At the death of Francois I, the national debt of France amounted to an income of 30,000 livres. At the death of Louis XIV, it was 2 milliards, 600 millions, at 28 livres the mark, which was equivalent in 1760, according to Desmarais, to 4 milliards, 500 millions, which would today be equivalent to 12 milliards. In the second place, and no offense to Combeferre, a charter granted is but a poor expedient of civilization. To save the transition, to soften the passage, to deaden the shock, to cause the nation to pass insensibly from the monarchy to democracy by the practice of constitutional fictions. What detestable reasons all those are! No, no, let us never enlighten the people with false daylight. Principles dwindle and pale in your constitutional cellar. No illegitimacy, no compromise, no grant from the king to the people. In all such grants there is an Article 14. By the side of the hand which gives, there is the claw which snatches back. I refuse your charter point blank. A charter is a mask. The lie lurks beneath it. A people which accepts a charter abdicates. The law is only the law when entire. No, no charter. It was winter. A couple of faggots were crackling in the fireplace. This was tempting, and Courfeyrac could not resist. He crumpled the poor Touquet Charter in his fist and flung it in the fire. The paper flashed up. Combeferre watched the masterpiece of Louis XVIII burn philosophically, and contented himself with saying, the charter metamorphosed into flame. And sarcasms, sallies, jests, that French thing which is called entrain, and that English thing which is called humour, good and bad taste, good and bad reasons, all the wild pyrotechnics of dialogue, mounting together and crossing from all points of the room, produced a sort of merry bombardment over their heads. End of Book 4, Chapter 4. Book 4 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Bruce Peary. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 4, The Friends of the ABC. Chapter 5, Enlargement of Horizon. The shocks of youthful minds among themselves have this admirable property, that one can never foresee the spark, nor divine the lightning flash. What will dart out presently, no one knows. The burst of laughter starts from a tender feeling. At the moment of jest, the serious makes its entry. Impulses depend on the first chance word. The spirit of each is sovereign. Jest suffices to open the field to the unexpected. These are conversations with abrupt turns, in which the perspective changes suddenly. Chance is the stage manager of such conversations. A severe thought, starting oddly from a clash of words, suddenly traversed the conflict of quips in which Grantaire, Bahorel, Prouvaire, Bossuet, Combeferre, and Courfeyrac were confusedly fencing. How does a phrase crop up in a dialogue? Whence comes it that it suddenly impresses itself on the attention of those who hear it? We have just said that no one knows anything about it. In the midst of the uproar, Bossuet all at once terminated some apostrophe to Combeferre with this date: June 18th, 1815, Waterloo. At this name of Waterloo, Marius, who was leaning his elbows on a table beside a glass of water, removed his wrist from beneath his chin and began to gaze fixedly at the audience. Pardieu! Exclaimed Courfeyrac. Parbleu was falling into disuse at this period. That number 18 is strange and strikes me. It is Bonaparte's fatal number. Place Louis in front and Brumaire behind, and you have the whole destiny of the man, with this significant peculiarity, that the end treads close on the heels of the commencement. Enjolras, who had remained mute up to that point, broke the silence and addressed this remark to Combeferre. You mean to say the crime and the expiation. This word crime overpassed the measure of what Marius, who was already greatly agitated by the abrupt evocation of Waterloo, could accept. He rose, walked slowly to the map of France spread out on the wall, and at whose base an island was visible in a separate compartment, laid his finger on this compartment, and said, Corsica, a little island which has rendered France very great. This was like a breath of icy air. All ceased talking. They felt that something was on the point of occurring. Bahorel, replying to Bossuet, was just assuming an attitude of the torso to which he was addicted. He gave it up to listen. Enjolras, whose blue eye was not fixed on anyone, and who seemed to be gazing at space, replied, without glancing at Marius, France needs no Corsica to be great. France is great because she is France, quia nomina leo. Marius felt no desire to retreat. He turned towards Enjolras, and his voice burst forth with a vibration which came from a quiver of his very being. God forbid that I should diminish France, but amalgamating Napoleon with her is not diminishing her. Come, let us argue the question. I am a newcomer among you, but I will confess that you amaze me. Where do we stand? Who are we? Who are you? Who am I? Let us come to an explanation about the Emperor. I hear you say Buonaparte, accentuating the U like the royalists. I warn you that my grandfather does better still. He says Buonaparte. I thought you were young men. Where then is your enthusiasm? And what are you doing with it? Whom do you admire if you do not admire the Emperor? And what more do you want? If you will have none of that great man, what great man would you like? He had everything. He was complete. He had in his brain the sum of human faculties. He made codes like Justinian. He dictated like Caesar. His conversation was mingled with the lightning flash of Pascal, with the thunderclap of Tacitus. He made history and he wrote it. His bulletins are Iliads. He combined the cipher of Newton with the metaphor of Mahomet. He left behind him in the East words as great as the pyramids. At Tilsit he taught emperors majesty. At the Academy of Sciences he replied to Laplace. In the Council of State he held his own against Merlin. He gave a soul to the geometry of the first and to the chicanery of the last. He was a legist with the attorneys and sidereal with the astronomers. Like Cromwell blowing out one of two candles, he went to the temple to bargain for a curtain tassel. He saw everything. He knew everything, which did not prevent him from laughing good-naturedly beside the cradle of his little child. And all at once frightened Europe lent an ear, armies put themselves in motion, parks of artillery rumbled, pontoons stretched over the rivers, clouds of cavalry galloped in the storm, cries, trumpets, a trembling of thrones in every direction. The frontiers of kingdoms oscillated on the map. The sound of a superhuman sword was heard as it was drawn from its sheath. They beheld him, rise erect on the horizon with a blazing brand in his hand and a glow in his eyes. Unfolding amid the thunder his two wings, the Grand Army and the Old Guard, and he was the Archangel of War. All held their peace, and Enjolras bowed his head. Silence always produces somewhat the effect of acquiescence, of the enemy being driven to the wall. Marius continued with increased enthusiasm, and almost without pausing for breath. Let us be just, my friends. What a splendid destiny for a nation to be the empire of such an emperor, when that nation is France, and when it adds its own genius to the genius of that man. To appear and to reign, to march and to triumph, to have for halting places all capitals, to take his grenadiers and to make kings of them, to decree the falls of dynasties, and to transfigure Europe at the pace of a charge, to make you feel that when you threaten you lay your hand on the hilt of the sword of God, to follow in a single man Hannibal, Caesar, Charlemagne, to be the people of some one who mingles with your dawns the startling announcement of a battle won, to have the cannon of the Invalides to rouse you in the morning, to hurl you into abysses of light prodigious words which flame for ever, Marengo, Arcola, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram, to cause constellations of victories to flash forth at each instant from the zenith of the centuries, to make the French Empire a pendant to the Roman Empire, to be the great nation and to give birth to the Grand Army, to make its legions fly forth over all the earth, as a mountain sends out its eagles on all sides to conquer, to dominate, to strike with lightning, to be in Europe a sort of nation gilded through glory, to sound athwart the centuries a trumpet blast of Titans, to conquer the world twice, by conquest and by dazzling. That is sublime, and what greater thing is there? To be free, said Combeferre. Marius lowered his head in his turn. That cold and simple word had traversed his epic effusion like a blade of steel, and he felt it vanishing within him. When he raised his eyes, Combeferre was no longer there. Probably satisfied with his reply to the apotheosis, he had just taken his departure, and all, with the exception of Enjolras, had followed him. The room had been emptied. Enjolras, left alone with Marius, was gazing gravely at him. Marius, however, having rallied his ideas to some extent, did not consider himself beaten. There lingered in him a trace of inward fermentation, which was on the point, no doubt, of translating itself into syllogisms arrayed against Enjolras, when, all of a sudden, they heard some one singing on the stairs as he went. It was Combeferre, and this is what he was singing. Si César m'avait donné la gloire et la guerre, et qu'il me fallait quitter l'amour de ma mère, je dirais au grand César, reprends ton sceptre et ton char. J'aime mieux ma mère, ô Gouet, j'aime mieux ma mère. The wild and tender accents with which Combeferre sang communicated to this couplet a sort of strange grandeur. Marius, thoughtfully, and with his eyes diked on the ceiling, repeated almost mechanically, "My mother?" At that moment he felt Enjolras' hand on his shoulder. "Citizen," said Enjolras to him, "my mother is the Republic." End of Book 4, Chapter 5.
Of Book 4 of Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Les Misérables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 4, Les Misérables, Chapter 6. Res Angusta. That evening left Marius profoundly shaken, and with a melancholy shadow in his soul. He felt what the earth may possibly feel at the moment when it is torn open with the iron, in order that grain may be deposited within it. It feels only the wound. The quiver of the germ and the joy of the fruit only arrived later. Marius was gloomy. He had but just acquired a faith. Must he then reject it already? He affirmed to himself that he would not. He declared to himself that he would not doubt. And he began to doubt, in spite of himself. To stand between two religions, from one of which you have not as yet emerged, and another into which you have not yet entered, is intolerable. And twilight is pleasing only to bat-like souls. Marius was clear-eyed, and he required the true light. The half-lights of doubt pained him. Whatever may have been his desire to remain where he was, he could not halt there. He was irresistibly constrained to continue, to advance, to examine, to think, to march further. Whither would this lead him? He feared, after having taken so many steps which had brought him nearer to his father, to now take a step which should estrange him from that father. His discomfort was augmented by all the reflections which occurred to him. An escarpment rose around him. He was in accord neither with his grandfather nor with his friends. Daring in the eyes of the one, he was behind the times in the eyes of the other. And he recognized the fact that he was doubly isolated, on the side of age and on the side of youth. He ceased to go to the Café Musain. In the troubled state of his conscience, he no longer thought of certain serious sides of existence. The realities of life do not allow themselves to be forgotten. They soon elbowed him, abruptly. One morning the proprietor of the hotel entered Marius's room and said to him, "Monsieur Courfeyrac answered for you." "Yes, but I must have my money." "Request Courfeyrac to come and talk with me," said Marius. Courfeyrac having made his appearance, the host left them. Marius then told him what it had not before occurred to him to relate, that he was the same as alone in the world, and had no relatives. "What is to become of you?" said Courfeyrac. "I do not know in the least," replied Marius. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know." "Have you any money?" 15 francs. "Do you want me to lend you some?" "Never." "Have you clothes?" "Here is what I have." "Have you trinkets?" "A watch." "Silver?" "Gold. Here it is." "I know a clothes dealer who will take your frock coat and a pair of trousers." "That is good." "You will then have only a pair of trousers, a waistcoat, a hat, and a coat." "And my boots." "What? You will not go barefoot? What opulence!" "That will be enough." "I know a watchmaker who will buy your watch." "That is good." "No, it is not good. What will you do after that?" "Whatever is necessary. Anything honest, that is to say." "Do you know English?" "No." "Do you know German?" "No." "So much the worse." "Why?" "Because one of my friends, a publisher, is getting up a sort of an encyclopedia, for which you might have translated English or German articles. It is badly paid work, but one can live by it. I will learn English and German. And in the meanwhile, I will live on my clothes and my watch. The clothes dealer was sent for. He paid 20 francs for the cast-off garments. They went to the watchmaker's. He bought the watch for 45 francs. That is not bad, said Marius to Courfeyrac on their return to the hotel. With my 15 francs, that makes 80. And the hotel bill, observed Courfeyrac. Hello, I had forgotten that, said Marius. The landlord presented his bill, which had to be paid on the spot. It amounted to 70 francs. I have 10 francs left, said Marius. The deuce! Exclaimed Courfeyrac. You will eat up 5 francs while you are learning English, and 5 while learning German. That will be swallowing a tongue very fast, or 100 sous very slowly. In the meantime, Aunt Gillenormand, a rather good-hearted person at bottom in difficulties, had finally hunted up Marius's abode. One morning, on his return from the law school, Marius found a letter from his aunt, and the 60 pistoles, that is to say 600 francs in gold, in a sealed box. Marius sent back the 30 louis to his aunt, with a respectful letter, in which he stated that he had sufficient means of subsistence, and that he should be able thenceforth to supply all his needs. At that moment he had 3 francs left. His aunt did not inform his grandfather of this refusal, for fear of exasperating him. Besides, had he not said, "Let me never hear the name of that blood-drinker again"? Marius left the Hotel de la Porte Saint-Jacques, as he did not wish to run in debt there. End of Book 4, Chapter 6.